Welcome to the Raef Granger podcast.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Raef Granger podcast. I have Ken with me, and I'll let him introduce himself. And we were just having a coffee one-to-one. One of the great things about BNI is I got introduced to Ken through a BNI member, and we just sort of hit it off, and we just enjoyed our conversation so much that we had a second conversation. And as Ken was talking to me about it, I was like, this is really interesting stuff, and I want to share it with my podcast, and Ken was gracious to do that. So I'm going to introduce him and give him a chance to speak right now, of course. But what I understand Ken to be is he's a data scientist formerly in the research and government realm who has an entrepreneurial bone in his body. And, you know, I like to talk to entrepreneurs, and he figured out a really neat way to use his superpowers for us business people. And Ken was just kind of going through that, and we'll go through that with you guys live on the air. And at some point, we do hope to have a video for this too. For the Patreon subscribers, you'll be able to check out the video over there. All right, Ken, kindly introduce yourself and give us your brief origin story.
Sure. My name is Ken Sheehan. I have a business called Nowhere. And I think that the easiest way.
Wait, I got to say, like, Nowhere is, I love the pun on that. And it's spelled K-N-O-W, but I love
correct.
The pun. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, it is fun to answer the phone and someone says, and I say, this is Ken from Nowhere. Wait, what?
I love it.
And I should mention that I do have a PhD and a master's in this, which is, I think, a little bit atypical in the business world.
I'd say.
Entirely.
Well, maybe not in the scientific realm, but perhaps in this realm.
No, it seemed like everyone had them when I was in government.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. But really, I think the easiest way to say what I do is I'm in the business of telling stories. And the story is what your data and the data that's available out there, it's not personally identifiable information, but there's an enormous amount of big data out there that allows us to tell the story of your business, your product. And that can be on a seasonal basis. It can be on a daily basis. It can be on a company-wide or a per product basis. And essentially, the goal here is understanding the story of your business to the extent that we can become ultra efficient at our advertising and management and networking efforts. And that can be digital or real world. But especially in today's world, I think it's really fun for me to help small businesses that wouldn't have this capability to approach big data and analysis in a way that they probably never knew was possible.
Yes, for sure. And we started to dive in. Ken
Yep.
sharing his secret sauce to what he does, and I'm going to describe it for you. I'm going to have to dust off my skill sets of back in my lawyering days. Ken, I don't know if you're aware of it, but for the podcast, I'll dust off my skills. So when I was doing litigation, we would have these things called depositions. And during a deposition, you have a stenographer there creating a written record of the meeting of the deposition. A deposition just means you're asking the other party some questions, to pose questions. And the stenographer is super interesting, by the way. They literally record everything. So if I say is recorded. And they don't record physical gestures. So if I scratch my nose, that's not recorded. But if I go, so Ken, you read the record back, you're like, oh my gosh, I said that a lot. But my point is, when you would hand a document to somebody to look at, you had to orally describe that document so it would be recorded into the record. So if I said, hey, look at this, and then you started to talk about it, it'd be confusing. And so what I want to describe is Ken is showing me a map of Massachusetts and how it is bounded or visually represented by zip code. And then I'm going to turn the baton over to Ken and kind of pick up the conversation because he was teaching me what he can do, basically.
Sure. And I think, zip code is an easy way for all of us to understand that we're located on the earth, like in a house, in a car, going along, doing something. And at any given time, we're in an area that can be defined by zip code. But that is a really sort of gross or broad estimate of where we are and sort of what's going on. And so I think another analogy would be, let's pretend we're walking along a beach, right? And we're on the sand. If you take another step, Raef, what are you likely to be standing on if you just were standing on sand?
Sand or water.
That's right. You're probably going to be stepping on some more sand. And if it's water, it's probably sand in the water.
Right.
You don't make this abrupt transition to some other thing that you're standing on, except in certain key areas. So it's like that in our general lives as well. Like, we're creatures of habit. As humans, we have patterns in our lives. And so you have, every day you go about your life, and you may have your house in your neighborhood. And it's pretty likely that your neighborhood is made up of other houses that are pretty similar. It's not like you have a $4 million house next to, a $10,000 trailer.
Right,
That's
or next to a tiny house or something.
That's right. It's not how it works. And so, what we want to do is sort of understand, rather than at the zip code, more at the neighborhood level, what those patterns are. And in that way, if a business can tap into that, and I know how to tap into that for the business, then we can tell the story and identify exactly how, in a very non-invasive manner. We don't need anybody's address. We don't need their names. We don't need anything. We just have general available data out there, as well as your data. We can always do ground truthing from that in your prior business data or industry data if you're starting up new. And we can then tell that story, but on a very granular, very focused level. So forget advertising to a zip code. Forget doing a direct mailer to 10,000 households just to make sure you get it in the right person's hand. Some people use like every door direct mail, or with Staples, they'll say, oh, why don't you go ahead and select, we can send to, a few basic criteria. This, that is the antiquated way of thinking about it. That is not very personal to your business. And we need to delve deeper into the story of you and your business and what you're selling, whether it's a service or a product, to reach the appropriate person. And there are clusters of those people out there that need to be identified to be more efficient with your time and money.
I should say, yeah, because this happened in our last coffee meeting and off air, that Ken's specialty, or speciality, as I like to say from Star Wars, is not hunting Sith, but maybe hunting Sith in a business way. But in that he uses his powers of data aggregation and data mining, and Ken, you can correct me where I'm wrong, to very specifically target and locate for a business person the type of audience they want, using different data points out there, which I just think is interesting.
Raef, that's a great sort of thing that you just brought up there. You said you can target the consumers or clients that the business wants. So there is, I think, two types of basic customers for a business. And that is the client and the person you're actually selling to. So the real person that you're selling to, versus your aspirational market. So some businesses, they have an aspirational market. Maybe it's they want to sell their product to, and they want to sell only the high dollar product and they're best of the line.
Yeah, like maybe for me, it'd be like a high end, CEO master group or something like that, master class.
That's right. And so, but that's the aspirational, what you really want, what gets, the juices flowing. The reality of it is you also have a large group of people that are in another category, which is your bread and butter, your actual, real, traditional, consistent client. So it's important to identify every different sort of group you're dealing with. Once you do that through a discovery process and making sure that you're looking at the data, this is all based on numbers and data and your understanding of your business. And then you create, as again, I'll tie it in back to that story. And you can go after those individual segments. It's all about breaking things up, getting specific, and then approaching just those people that have the highest probability of providing you sales. There's plenty of them out there, a lot of low-hanging fruit. Don't waste your money, especially as a small business, going after an area that just doesn't have the people that can afford or utilize your business. Maybe there's one or two people there, but you'd rather be going to the area that has 90% of the people that are ripe for the picking.
Right. So with the map that the listener can't see, you were starting to show me around the Boston area. Well, maybe later we'll see some version of it again on my page.
Yeah, I'll pull it out for you.
But you were starting to show me how the areas around Boston, and you were using a rural indicator and a urban indicator to show how your tools and your skill can narrow down.
Sure.
And that's when I paused you and then turned the record on. So let's go through that.
Sure. Well, that was we talked about zip code, and that's sort of one area. But there are so many different layers of data available. A really simple one is just sort of this binary, meaning there's a 0 or a 1, an urban or a rural. And in this instance, that is a page in the book of the story of data that can be applied to a business. And so let's say you are a pest control company. It is likely, if you are selling that product, that for some of your clients and services, rural is going to be a much more valuable place to be. So that is first thing you want to do, is maybe eliminate the urban designation if that comes out as statistically important, and go after the rural. You want to go after, it depends on the product, of course, but
right. I get you.
You can picture the scenario that would work. So that's just one data layer. But then as I was bringing in here, I was starting to bring in things that you can find in the census. Like we just are taking the 2020 census now, right? And that is one of the most undervalued, at least I think to the general public, things that our government does. It allows us to, of course, not only does taxes and who gets what in different areas, but what it also does is it tells the story of the United States in so many different levels, and very granular. And so if you can access the power of those thousands of data layers that are provided from that and parse those up and use them to tell the story of a business, we can actually get at much of what's going on within a business very effectively. And that's, one of the first steps that I do in the discovery process is just do a general linkage of some of what your clients have already done if you're an existing business, and I link it up with some just general metrics, right? Mm-hmm. Like how old are people? Do you deal with men or women? Are you selling a product for feet and toenails? Maybe that's certainly got to be a very specific subset for the most part of people that are interested in that. Are you a podiatrist? Are you going after people that have conditions or just making toenails pretty? These are different things. All of them have a specific market that you can go after. And again, I will say, Raef, that I think, we're all cognizant of privacy and privacy laws changing. People don't like when the ads follow them around. It gets a little bit creepy.
It's a little bit creepy.
Yeah. And
I wonder if the younger generation will feel that way, or if that's just us older generation.
That's another podcast, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'll have to ask my daughter. She's 13.
Yeah. I mean, it's, privacy is something we're considering more and more. I think there's not a lot of realization of just how invasive it can get. Facebook gets in trouble with it now and then. We've seen it in the news.
But that younger generation, I have a son who's 19. They're not on Facebook. They know of it, but I'll have to ask him if he's that concerned. I'm just now curious if like one of those ads, pop up. I forgot I was looking for something. I don't know. Well, here's a great example. You and I were talking about, I never understood, because you said, I'm going to take notes on a legal pad. And I said, when I went to law school, I never got the answer as to why legal pads are bigger. I still don't know. So I Googled it.
Your ideas are bigger.
Yeah, that's right. Right. We're just so verbose. We need more pages. Yeah. But I'm always like, why can't you just flip the page in a regular sized tablet? So I Googled it, and it tells me why they're yellow, which I wasn't interested in. But anyway, now I'm going to get all sorts of ads about writing tablets. You know what I mean? So
that's right. Yeah. And so I think that, there's a GDPR or whatever it is overseas, and California is privacy laws. We're becoming more cognizant of all those things. And I think going back to my point is
please.
This is all, all of this that I'm talking about, these stories that we can generate and tell at this neighborhood level, it's without identifying anyone's individual. There's no ever association with who's in those homes or who's in those neighborhoods. It's just, we're looking at general qualities and categories. So there's no attachment of that personal data to any of this.
This may be putting you on the spot, but when you said, I think it'll illustrate greatly when you said, let's say you're looking for toenails. Like, let's say I have developed a toenail fungus cream that's revolutionary. Like when I first met you, I'm like, how in the heck are you going to locate people with toenail fungus or whatever? And you're like, well, no, it doesn't work like that, but there are other indicators that may represent that potential client base. If I said that right.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at everything from, let's say you want to go after people that are bedridden, right? They have ambulatory issues. And so you can certainly get at that. You can see, who has health insurance and who doesn't in higher proportion, and whether it's provided by a business, or they're purchasing it online, or purchasing it through an exchange, or they're self-employed. You can get at it through general age of a category. Let's say there is, you find that people with toenail fungus tend to be sedentary people that live in high humidity areas of a certain age. Well, we can certainly go in and create a suitability model for that.
See, I love how your scientific mind broke that down to be like, oh, it could be from an age, it could be a humidity. Like I just never would have thought of that in a million years. So I think that's what's cool. That's what you offer business.
So I think that's where the artistry comes in, is that we have thousands and thousands of layers of data available to us. It could be, if you're a landscape company, maybe it's important that you know where floods or big wind events came through. So you can take environmental data, you can take government data, you can take your prior business understanding and that sort of data. It really is endless. The point is that you just want to be able to tell the story of you and your business as effectively as possible, and then use that to leverage your everything from your advertising to your networking in a more efficient manner. Like, stop wasting time and energy figuring out where your clients are, and just know where you're more likely to find them.
I love
when
it.
you're successful, you can go elsewhere.
And can you share, like you did with me when we first had our coffee meeting, your origin story? How did you get to where you are now? Like, start wherever you want. How'd you get interested in something like this?
Well,
because I can tell you're passionate about it.
I am, and that's sure. I get really excited about all of this. But my origin story is that I actually went to grad school back in the early 2000s. I started with a master's and then went through a PhD program, and it was in the environmental realm. So I was working with the USGS through school, so the United States Geological Survey. And
they're the people that pound those spikes into the top of the mountains that we climb, right?
Amongst other things. They're an extremely talented, diverse group of scientists.
What are those spikes, by the way?
They're usually they could be elevation markers. They could be markers of, boundaries, or pinpointing something for surveying. Okay. But, obviously survey. And I in that time, I was studying, of course, the environmental realm and ecological systems and organisms within the realm, whether it was fish or deer or what have you. And the statistics that I was learning were how to figure out why something was where it was. And I would take all these different data layers in the environment and then statistically analyze those and figure out, oh, well, you know what? We can predict where the other ones will be, or what the habitat, which is where we all live, right? A neighborhood is habitat, where that habitat is for that organism. And then we can make an assessment based on that. Well, there should be other populations in that area as well, based on what we can predict and know. And so I did a postdoc for that as well for several years on a big ecological grant. And then after that, I worked for the USGS out in the West for a little while.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I did that research. I did some research down in the Grand Canyon. I did a little bit of work out there, just fantastic. And then, of course, life intervenes and you decide, what do you really want to do? Where do you really want to settle down? And so I decided and made a decision with my wife. We decided to come back east and start a business. And so here I am.
What, when you're talking about that, it's the USGS. Why does it exist? Why do we need that? Give us some history on it. How did it get created?
Way to go with the big question. Big questions, right? So it's been around for quite some time. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
Is this like 1800s or?
Oh yes, right. Like I don't know if you remember the one-armed man. Lake Powell is named after him. Have you ever heard of that story? Well, the USGS has been around a long time. So there have been explorers associated with the West before the U.S. was fully formed and all the states were there. The USGS has been there for a long time, and 100 years. I do not know.
Okay, just a long time.
A long time, and it's always been the realm of scientists and explorers looking to protect what we have as a country, to understand it. It's the public trust, and these are scientists that work towards keeping that public trust and understanding it to the best that we possibly can. So, it could be that we protect endangered species so that we can all enjoy them in the future. It could be that we are simply studying how water moves through a system so that we can use that resource wisely. Like in the West, water is a gigantic issue, of course, another podcast. But in terms of managing that water so that there is appropriate amounts of it and habitat for both the ecosystem that exists there, independent of us, or though we're part of it, and interact with it. And then, of course, the human world, which we've sort of diverged in some ways from the natural ecosystem, but we still rely on it and interact with it and impact it. And so how do you balance all of those things? The U.S. is, in-depth involved with all of that. I'm sure your listeners definitely know that, but it's actually a wonderful thing that is services that's provided for the public good.
What made you pick to work there?
Well, I'd gone through the system of schooling where I had a scholarship that was working with the USGS through I was at a land grant school, and so the USGS.
What's a land grant school?
So a lot of state and big universities, they end up having what's called a relationship with the state. It's a state-funded entity, and then they often have relationship. There may have been an enormous amount of land that was granted to the university for the purposes of educating the populace. Is sort of how I understand it in general. So that could be like, it was often started like as a farming educational thing or some other aspect. But, like you'll have a state university system, and some of those were often land grant schools.
Do we have any out here on the East Coast?
Sure. Like you have them in most states, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, a lot of the state university systems were sort of started in that manner, or at least some parts of them.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying is that the USGS often has offices in many of these schools, and part of that is to develop talent and educate people that will then at some point work within the USGS system as scientists. It's really going into the public sector, right? You're working usually not for a wonderful salary, but to better the public good and understanding scientifically, and help manage what we have as a nation.
Part of the mission of my podcast when talking to entrepreneurs, I did not share with you, or actually I'm not even sure the listeners, is that two things. One is I always just find it interesting, like if you and I were at a cocktail party or again at a coffee meeting, I like to just know what people do. And most people are a little bit shy, or they'll sort of say the 5 throwaway comments that they're used to saying at cocktail parties, and I'll say things like, "Oh, tell me more about that," and the person's like, "You don't want to hear about that. It's like super boring." But I do. I don't know. So intrinsically, I find it interesting. But also, I find that with I have some older children. I have a 27-year-old. I have a 19-year-old, and especially that millennial generation, that 27-year-old generation, I think sometimes they get lost and they think the only career opportunities are doctor, lawyer, teacher, nurse,
Oh, sure.
and I like to talk to entrepreneurs. Like I've had 3D animators on here. I've had energy. A friend of mine's an engineer, but specific to the energy space, especially
Cool.
renewable energy. And part of my dream is that some 19-year-olds like listening to this and being like, "That sounds really cool. I want to be a data scientist or something." And then you're like teaching them the pathway to that.
That's a funny dream, Raef.
I know, since I have all of 76 listeners at this point in time.
Better than none.
So that's right. So that's why I'm kind of digging in. If you're wondering, like, why is he digging in this? So
I did a horrible job of explaining the USGS. It's been a few years since I worked there, but
no, I don't think so at all. So what's your master's degree in?
So both my master's and PhD technically are in wildlife and fisheries biology. So the easiest way to explain it is ecological science. And so like I have published peer review work where some of the techniques that I actually pioneered for environmental systems were published in peer review journals for their unique, capability in advancing the state of the science. And I use some of those in the analysis that I do for businesses.
I see. Okay, that's really cool. And that's another important distinguishment that I think, again, when I talk to younger people that want to know what to do with their careers, they often, like, here you are, that's what your degree is in. and your
Yep.
doctoral degree, and yet here you are with a business that's helping smaller entrepreneurs use your skill set to target the types of businesses they want to target. And so,
Sure.
what I often tell people, correct me if I'm wrong, in your case, is like, have a passion for what you're doing at the moment. You don't have to necessarily, yes, if you're going to be a doctor, yeah, there's a line. Okay. If you're going to be a nurse, there's a line. If you're going to be a teacher, take these courses, take the pass. Even if you're going to be a lawyer, there's not a direct line. Law
No.
school accepts any bachelor degree. You could be an art history major and go to law school. So don't worry about the line necessarily. Do what you like in the moment.
I think it requires a certain amount of ability to think the classic, phrase outside the box. You have to get creative with your education and see where it fits. I think, if anything, actually my liberal arts education was what taught me that creativity. And it was the PhD and the master's that taught me the skills that I apply, using that creativity. But the reality of it is that the statistics that I was using for the environment are the exact same that I use for people. And so I've been doing this for 15 years. The question just becomes a more creative one of how to be that artist that paints the brush and the painting for a given business and puts the power of very powerful data that we've collected as a nation in many instances, even at the local granular level, and tell the story of your business. And that's very powerful for someone that's trying to figure out where to open a new store or where to save money on advertising. I mean, right now we just went through and are still going through, a crazy global issue, right? Businesses are shut down, states are still shut down. So how do you give better decision-making tools to a business? I mean, that makes me feel good. So if that is one defining thing, that is sort of why I wanted to make this transition, is that there is a lot shorter pathway to helping people out than applying for a grant and doing a study that goes for multiple years before you see the result.
I was just about to ask you that, is if you don't mind sharing,
Sure.
what had you leave the educational and research realm? What was the light bulb moment or watershed moment or eureka moment, if you had one, that said, I want to do this with business?
Well, it's a little bit of necessity in the sense that, just the general sort of environment of getting money for grants. 20 years ago, you could, as an independent scientist, come out, become an adjunct or other professor, and build your own research sort of group and move forward that way. That is much, much less available to folks. It's a smaller pool of, well, as a country, we're funding a lot less for research as a whole than we used to. So
that doesn't sound good.
Well, a lot of research out there that the government funds, that's really the farm team, right? Those are all the farm leagues that when that research finds something, a beautiful nugget of knowledge or some new discovery, then they get called up to the big leagues. And then many companies, whether it's a drug company, whether it is, some other, Microsoft or what have you, a lot of the initial research that was done, it was in the farm leagues funded by federally, funded grants that scientists across the U.S. apply for. And now that still is robust and ongoing. However, compared to the past, it is not as viable as a career path as it used to be. I mean, you probably are aware even now that if you go to many universities, a lot of classes are taught by adjuncts that are paid essentially McDonald's wages with a PhD.
Yes, right. And no health benefits, the whole 9 yards.
So with that there, that statement sort of hanging out there, I don't want to get into it too much. It really necessitates that if you want to move somewhere and make your own way rather than moving around the country to chase grants and chase these positions as they open up, of course, the decision can be made that you go out on your own and get creative with that business endeavor. And so for me, I wanted to control my own boat a little bit more.
Be the captain of your own ship, as we say.
That's right. So, of course, it's a lot of chance of decision making, and you try to put a little bit of savings away and work towards that. I'm very, very fiscally conservative. I'm classic New England. I put $1 in the bank and hopefully it's there 30 years from now. And so I approach my business the same way, meaning that I feel that other businesses also want to be frugal with their money and be efficient with it as well. So, well, that's a great way. Like if I can use, like you say, my powers for good in the business world and tell the story rather than in an ecosystem with fish, but with a business that has a product and they want to figure out why those people are where they are or where they are that are buying it. It's the same exact statistics. And I think that makes me feel good.
Did you enjoy, you reminded me of my transition from teaching. I was a high school teacher and I too loved my liberal arts degree. I was an English literature major, and I loved it. And who would think that reading a bunch of plays, and I had a particular bent towards Elizabethan literature, so I read a ton of Shakespeare, like all those other Shakespeare plays no one's even heard about beyond Othello and Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet and stuff. But it served me well to this day in critical thinking, and the major was fun. I got to read all the way through, college types of stuff. But I remember being an educator and I really liked the teaching aspect of my job, but I didn't like the bureaucracy. I didn't like that I had a principal or a superintendent or a chairperson who wasn't their boots on the ground, sort of dictating what I could do and not do. And I was like, those things are just unfettered in the business market. We either have an idea and it'll succeed if people like it, and there's not some arbitrary person above me telling me, don't do that, do that. Like when I launched Masterclass, it was an idea I had. I created it. I had the help of some mentors, great help. They helped me tweak it. I launched it and it's taken off. It's now full. I have 2 classes full, looking for the third. And I didn't have some arbitrary chairperson above me going, no, it's not going to work. I'm not allowing you to do it. It just drove me nuts. That's what I love about the business world. You live and die by the sword.
Oh, right. Oh, so, you sort of asked motivations, right? Is that, for me, I'm like a big idea person. I like to move things forward. I like to be creative, and I love the scientific process. It's just a really, wonderful thing to be involved in. But if I figure out that I can predict something, or I can understand something, I'm less concerned with whether it's 0.001% accurate one way or another. However,
which is what happens in the scientific world, or the education world.
Sure. Well, yeah, in academia and sort of publishing, et cetera. It's not necessarily that has an enormous amount of value. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily where my interests lie.
Yeah.
Like, I am very happy to say that if it functions, it's valuable. Let's move on to the next thing. For me personally.
For you personally.
But the business world works like that, right? So if you can save a business 70% over some aspect of what they were doing previously, they don't care if it's 70.001%.
That's right.
Or 69.002%.
No,
it doesn't matter. You're saving them money in a good fashion. And yes, you're going to improve it down the line, but it doesn't mean you don't immediately move forward with that, knowledge. And so there's a much more, I wouldn't say healthy, but there's less delay between figuring something out and getting it enacted and out there and interacting with people and having it help them.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you had that knowledge about yourself and you're like, I'm gonna take this interest and out into the business world where it's more aligned. It's just a personal preference.
Right. I mean, I love teaching and I will probably go back to it at some point in time.
Me too.
And I really do enjoy I love it. Don't get me wrong. I was in it for a long time, over a decade. And so I will always miss it. But in terms of fitting me personally at this moment in time, charting my own course and doing this for businesses that would never otherwise have the capability of putting their stories together like this and creating those efficiencies and opportunities, many of which are hidden, by the way, because you may live in a neighborhood right next to someone that's your perfect client, but you wouldn't have known it without doing a little analysis, and many people don't have that capability.
Yeah. We're not going to go for too much longer, just to let you know. I do have one more question that I want you to have the last word on anything we might not have covered that you want to cover. Oh, shoot, my last question left my brain. Is there anything, it'll come back to me. Is there anything that, that, I interrupted you from or you want to cover that I didn't ask or anything like that?
No, I mean, thanks for the opportunity, Raef. This has been interesting. I don't normally get to sort of speak to it. I tend to get verbose, so you have to calm me down. I get excited about all.
Hey,
of this,
that works in the podcast medium, you know.
Oh, I'm learning as I go.
I wouldn't have asked otherwise if you were, not verbose.
Okay. So really, I think that the main message here is just that every business has a story, and people put their blood, sweat, and tears into their business. That's what I love about it. And the ability to help people out with that is something that keeps me passionate about it. And just, stories are interesting. Like you said, like you had me on because I had a story you wanted to learn more about. I've enjoyed learning about yours as well. Yours is equally as diverse. And a lot of people have those out there. And so if it's a mom and pop, or if it's a medium or small size business, I mean, it could be $50 million and still be small. And great, if they can save $2 million on their normal ad budget, wonderful. Great. It works there as well. But the point being is that not everyone is a Google or a Coke, and people should have the ability
or that budget.
That's right. And so there's a lot of ability to do that. And I'm taking it and putting it in the hands of some of the people that can use it most.
On that, this is not the last question. It's still escaping me. It'll wake me up at night at this point. How do people reach you? Yes.
Oh, sure. I have recently entered into the digital age, and I put my website online, which is www.wenowhere, and nowhere is just KNOWHERE, so only one W.com.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah.
And other than that, if you have I can certainly on Patreon or whatever, put an email link or whatever else you need.
Yeah, send it to me, and I'll actually just put it in the show notes. That way, It's not behind the Patreon wall. Speaking of Patreon, yeah, if you like what you hear and you want to support the show, any and all amounts help. There's a level for everybody and different reward levels, and I do the stuff because I like it. You can think of it as a tip in the tip jar. Sometimes people feel like they just want to help support independent content, and that's what the Patreon is for. So.
Now, if I wanted to put a link to this on my website, how would I go about doing that, Raef?
You would, at this point, you have to email Raef@RaefGranger.com, because the Patreon page is in building phase as I work with my videographer. I want to have the right kind of video. It works well for Patreon. So in the past, I didn't tell you this, Ken, and I'll use this opportunity. I don't know if I told the listeners here, but in my past, about 12 years ago or so, I started a gaming podcast called The D6 Generation with two of my friends. And the gaming podcast was focused on role-playing games such as Dungeons and Dragons. It was on what we call pulp gaming, so not a video gaming podcast, which was rare back in the day. Most podcasts on games were video games. And we were just three friends, and we were one of my friends, Russ, was more technical. He's like, we should do a podcast. And my other friend, Craig, and I were like, what's that? And so we started it, and it was just the three of us talking about our love of the miniature gaming world and board gaming world, European style board gaming. And the stupid thing took off. Like our first show, we had 1,000 listens,
What?
Yeah. And the very first one, and you can hear it. It's still up there. Again, it's the d6generation.com. You'll find the website. It's on iTunes. It's there. So we just kept going, and we did 2 shows a week, and the darn thing grew. And so at our heyday, we had about 22,000 listens per episode.
Oh, man. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at.
No, it was nothing to sneeze at. And it generated some advertising revenue in the earlier days. And then we switched to this Patreon model where people could put a tip in the tip jar. And it would help fund us to go to the gaming conventions where these games are played. And we became de facto game reviewers. And it just organically would go. So a new game would come out and we would review it. And so game companies, guess what, started to send us their games to review, which we didn't keep those games. We would donate those out to the public through different games. We would, raffles and stuff like that. Or not raffles, free giveaways. Yeah. So anyway, the darn thing grew. And so I've learned a lot about podcasting, and I say was because we recently sunsetted it. I appeared as a regular host for 92 episodes. And then after that, my business life got busy and I couldn't attend the gaming conventions as much. And so the grind of it sort of wore me down. And so I semi-retired, and then I would pop on periodically after that on different shows. And we still do, it's still alive. Now it's just in a different format. And actually, I didn't tell the people on this podcast either, but we started a Dungeons and Dragons session that Russ is recording, and he throws it up on the D6 Generation feed. So if you want to hear, tabletop board gaming and hear my voice again, but it was a good time, and I learned a lot, and I learned how to do Patreon stuff. So that's the long-winded answer of how Patreon is. But as of the recording of this in June of 2020, I don't have the page up yet, but that's my goal for the end of the month or July. So long-winded answer, I don't have the website up yet. But what you could do is when it is up, whenever you hear this episode, you just go into Patreon and search the Raef Granger podcast, and then it'll pop up. So thanks,
cool.
Ken. I appreciate the opportunity to blab about my old podcast.
Yeah, thank you for the audience as well.
Yeah, you bet. All right, so I'm going to turn off the recorder. Thanks for listening, everybody. Reach out to Ken if you have any questions or you like what you hear. Like I said, he's passionate, he's smart, and he's easy to talk to. So don't be intimidated by a PhD in science, that's for sure. All right, thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.